Hello, my name is Michael Corley, and I'm Head of Policy and Public Affairs for the British Society for Antimicrobial Chemotherapy. I'm a trained journalist, and I used to work for the Coventry Telegraph and the Gloucestershire Echo, where I was the politics editor. Thank you for inviting me to speak on this very interesting and important topic. What follows is less of a snapshot and more of an X-ray, because if there's a problem, I think it's skeletal. And I'd like to start with a quick comparison. When I was 6, which is the same age that my daughter is now, the UK population received much of its information from a limited number of mostly very credible sources. There were 3 TV channels, BBC One, BBC Two, and ITV, a handful of radio stations. There was the Central Office of Information, the COI, which was a government department that worked with Whitehall and public bodies to produce information campaigns on issues that affected the lives of all citizens, from health and education to rights and welfare. And of course, there were newspapers, with a handful of press barons deriving great wealth and power from huge sales. But thanks to the internet, social media, and the age of the small state, the world my daughter knows is very different. Fake news is not new, of course. Back in the mid-1700s, for example, during the height of the Jacobite Rebellion, seditious printers reported that King George II was ill in an attempt to destabilize the establishment. This snippet was picked up by more reputable printers and republished, making it very difficult for the public back then to tell fact from fiction. Now, I think what's new is our apparent powerlessness to contain, control, and effectively counter lies, rumors, and falsehoods. One might argue that in the way that COVID-19 has exposed system frailty and inequality in public health, so the most virulent strains of fake news have exposed the sorry state of mainstream media and our inability to so far regulate social media. So what's gone wrong? Well, you know something's not right when one of the UK's most high-profile journalists decides to investigate his own industry. The analyses of Nick Davis, published in Flat Earth News, showed that 60% of the content of UK papers was based mainly on wire copy or press releases, a practice Davies called churnalism, while only 12% were original stories, and another 12% of stories showed evidence that the central statement had not been corroborated. Based on the data, the research showed that everyday practices of news judgment, fact-checking, balance, criticizing, and interrogating sources that are, in theory, central to routine day-to-day journalism were the exception and not the rule. Davies' thesis is that journalists themselves are not the reason for the increase in what he calls falsehood, distortion, and propaganda. He thinks the problem is structural. Corporations that operate under a logic of commercialism have taken over newsrooms. Citing Rupert Murdoch, the founder and then CEO of News Corp, as an example, Davies says that under the corporate model, there are simply fewer journalists working at newspapers, but they also have an increased workload. So this led to churnalism, as we said, which in turn led to stock responses and stock images. And if you think only back to this week when the Washington Post reported on the breakthrough with the vaccines for COVID-19, the images used were of crying children, big needles, and lab rats. This approach also leads to bad science. In the book of the same name, Ben Goldacre pointed to the role of mainstream media in badly misrepresenting science. He blames this on the disproportionately high number of humanities graduates in journalism and the concomitant reliance on wacky, breakthrough, or scare stories, which very often just turn out to be publicity stunts. The upshot has been to, on the one hand, confuse, alarm, or incite people who don't understand science, and on the other, to corrode trust in journalists and journalism for the people that do. So even in the face of such reckless and illegal behavior, which peaked with the phone hacking scandal and the shutdown of the News of the World in 2011, the industry still believes it's being held back unfairly by being scrutinized in a way that social media platforms aren't. If you think about the impact of the Leveson inquiry, which was to set up 2 new press regulatory bodies in the Independent Press Standards Organisation and Impress, in a way they have a point, because there are no equivalents, no counterparts providing scrutiny or accountability for social media companies as it stands. So against this backdrop, we still see mainstream media in a blind race with high-profile social media companies to find clickbait, content that drives traffic by being shared, liked on, clicked on, and it in turn drives revenue through online ads. And the problem for science? Well, this is journalism on a much bigger scale and at a much quicker pace. You only need to look at the news item from last month, Woolworths High Street relaunch, where a sixth form student was revealed to be behind the hoax story that Woolworths was reopening. Several prominent news outlets, including the Metro, Mail Online, and the Daily Mirror, reported that the chain was returning to high streets based on the word of a typo-strewn Twitter account with fewer than 1,000 followers. The 17-year-old responsible told The Guardian the experiment wasn't meant to get that big. And the moral of the story for the BBC? We tend to share posts that we want to be true or that confirm our biases. Who isn't missing Woolworths pick and mix, especially during the pandemic? So, plenty of darkness, maybe some light. Historian Thomas Fuller once said that the darkest hour is just before the dawn, and well, I think we are just starting to see the glimmer of something. More and more traditional news outlets do at least seem to be trying to move away from journalism and clickbait towards a business model where contributions and subscriptions help to ensure investment in good quality journalism, in a sort of new compact between the reporter and the reader. Also, there are signs that the big social media companies are starting to take their responsibilities more seriously and to find the golden mean that maintains freedom of expression, publication, and private ownership in balance with the rights of citizens to access accurate information. And we've seen this already with Twitter. Nearly half of Donald Trump's tweets since the presidential election have been flagged with a message stating that, quote, some or all of the content shared in the president's tweets are disputed and might be misleading about an election or other civic process. It also, crucially, added links to information pages about election security, with articles from reputable sources such as the Associated Press, which was responsible for helping to call states once the votes were tallied. Twitter had been planning for the spread of misinformation and disinformation in this way on its platform since September. And in addition, we're also seeing that the UK-based charity Full Fact has started working with Facebook and its cross-sharing platform WhatsApp. This was in direct response to the coronavirus and the ensuing rise in what it called harmful content. WhatsApp users are now being encouraged to identify content that they're not sure of and to forward it directly to Full Fact so that they can check it for them. But this is only, of course, one step in the right direction. Alongside the much greater responsibility being taken by traditional and new media, we also need to see more scientists trained as journalists and or to take to social media where they can develop a presence. Because let's face it, the world of 3 TV channels and a central office of information have gone for good. But what comes next must still be up to us. Because as we all know, public health does not take place in a vacuum. Because the evidence does not speak for itself, we have to speak for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, for that really interesting and topical presentation. We would now like to welcome Dr. Sarah Jarvis, MBE, to the stage. Sarah is a qualified GP and a prominent media personality, regularly featuring on BBC Radio 2's Jeremy Vine show as their resident doctor. Today, Sarah will be answering some key questions on how to manage the media in relation to vaccines. Sarah, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
My name's Dr. Sarah Jarvis. I am a GP. I've been a GP for just over 30 years, despite my youthful good looks. It's hard to believe, isn't it? But I've also been a medical broadcaster for most of that time, largely for the BBC, but also for other television and radio stations.
Why do you speak out in the media about vaccines? And why do you think it's important for vaccinologists to do the same?
I've spent far more time than I wish to think about in the media in the last 8 months. My media career happened completely by accident, but I genuinely believe that I can make a significant difference by allowing the facts to get in the way of a good headline. The problem is that these days, when everyone is a quote expert, the cheap response, the easy response on social media is, you're a GP, you're not an expert. You are vaccinologists. Nobody can level that allegation at you. That's why it's so important that you get out there and you counter the worst excess of this misinformation. Parents are hearing it, patients are hearing it, and if they continue to have doubts and there isn't a voice of reason, then they may well not be prepared to put themselves forward for vaccination.
What's your view on using social media platforms as a way of engaging with the public about healthcare?
I am a very reluctant social media user. I have a Twitter account, but actually somebody else set that up for me because they told me I needed to be involved on social media. I don't have Instagram. I don't have TikTok, which is probably not appropriate for this anyway, but certainly Instagram might be. And nor do I have Facebook except for my family and friends. But Twitter can be really, really useful. It's a very powerful tool, not just to post your own comments, but also to comment on other people's and to allow some of the facts to get out there. So I am an advocate of Twitter, and I do think it genuinely makes a big difference, but you do need a bit of a thick skin.
Vaccination can be a contentious topic. How do you deal with the negative comments you can receive from speaking out about vaccination in the media?
I love the mute button. You don't block people, you mute them because they can go on shouting at you and they have no idea that you can't hear. In all seriousness, you are going to get negative comments because there are so many anti-vaxxers out there. There are so many people who believe we shouldn't be in lockdown, the Keep Britain Free Brigade, the anti-face covering brigade, the anti pretty much everything brigade. It is, I think, worth preserving your own sanity and your own mental well-being by blocking people who are just not worth replying to. Think seriously before you reply, because if you reply to somebody who has very few users, then you are giving them a voice because you are magnifying their voice to all of your users. Hillary Clinton, I think, had quite a sensible way of looking at negative coverage. She said that she always took criticism seriously, but not personally. And this isn't personal. They have no idea who you are. They have no idea what you do or what you're like, but they will be attacking what you represent. But if we don't get out there, then that tide of misinformation is only going to get higher. So mute judiciously, but sometimes plentifully when it's appropriate. Probably blocking is okay, but they then know you've done it. So it's up to you whether you want to do that or not. And don't get engaged in something where you look at them and you think, there is no hope.
Do you have any overall advice on how to successfully advocate vaccines in the media?
From my experience as a GP, of course, the best way to prove that you really believe in something is to have personal experience. I have lost count during the MMR debacle of the number of times that I would be trying to persuade a patient or a parent. I would take them through all the data. I'd show them the randomized trials. I'd show them the Danish data. I'd explain to them that Wakefield had been struck off, all the rest of it. And then when it came to the end of it, they'd be looking at me with a blank expression and I'd say, now ask me the question you really want to ask. And that question was always the same, and it was, have you had your children vaccinated? And the answer, of course, was absolutely. So I came out on Good Morning Britain in about July to say, when I was asked, would you use this vaccine? And my response was, yeah, absolutely, in a heartbeat. And inevitably, there was some negative feedback. It's all very well for you to say that, put your money where your mouth is. Well, in fact, I was too old for the original studies, but I had already signed up for the National Vaccines Programme. And in fact, I am now on a vaccine trial. I have been delighted to publicise it. I've publicised it on Channel 5, on BBC Breakfast, on Radio 2, and the One Show on BBC One is doing a film about my journey through the vaccine trial. It is incredibly powerful to be able to say that you are personally taking part in a trial. That really is probably my single biggest tip. But otherwise, don't sensationalize things. It doesn't need sensationalizing. The simple fact of the matter is that we have eradicated one disease, at least smallpox, that killed millions. We have almost eradicated polio. From my perspective, I don't think there's any question that vaccinations have done more to save lives than any public health initiative in the history of the world ever, other than possibly clean water. So we have a lot of facts. The Oxford Vaccine Project, of course, is enormously helpful in that regard, but you probably have forgotten more than I've ever known about the Oxford Vaccine Project, or indeed about vaccines since breakfast. So I use my facts, I get reliable facts, probably best not to quote the World Health Organization too much at the moment, because that will just incite people more. But do use facts, but really importantly, practice what you're going to say if you're giving an interview, because you need to be able to make it simple.
Thank you, Sarah. That was a really interesting and thought-provoking interview. We are now going to hand back over to the chair of the session to begin the final question and answer session of the day.